turned into the RSN side of the business to talk to our friends at MSG Networks here in New York City. We are joined by Kevin Marotta. He is the SVP of Marketing and Content Strategy at MSG Networks. We really appreciate you being here, Kevin. We know this is a busy time of the year for you, both with NHL and NBA all getting underway right now. So thanks a lot for taking the time.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here and talk through some of this stuff.
Yeah, of course. For the audience, of course, if you're not in the New York area, MSG Networks carries a few teams. They're the broadcast home of the New York Knicks, New York Rangers, New York Islanders, New Jersey Devils. Can't forget the Buffalo Sabres up in the top of the state, and New York Red Bulls on the MLS side as well. To talk about sports betting specifically, MSG just recently announced a few new shows that have just recently gotten underway over in the past week or two. So not to steal any of your thunder away from you, Kevin, give us a little bit of the lay of the land of the approach to sports betting programming right now at MSG Networks.
Yeah, so I think our approach is, I'd say twofold, but it's more than two. It's like three or fourfold, I guess. But I'll start on some of the shows that you just mentioned that we launched. Ultimately, we did a bunch of research, talking to our fans, trying to figure out what sort of stuff they were looking for in the realm of sports betting content. And with that research, we worked through and developed three distinct shows with different sort of archetypes of talent and different types of people that we would have talking through sports betting within each of those shows. The three shows are the Better Half Hour, and that's driven around this energy and excitability of a host. That host is Alex Monaco. He's a sports host. He's a gambling aficionado, and he's super approachable and super excited about it. So that's sort of one show. The next show is the Betting Exchange, and that's more built around an exchange between a few different types of people. We've got a few folks on there: Jeff Johnson, Katie Mox, and Eric Coleman has been on that show. We launched that show actually about 6 weeks ago, and sort of the soft launch phase where we had it on once a week. That shows it takes the perspective of a former athlete and pairs it up with the perspective of someone who's a little bit more of a gambling professional, and then pairs it up with someone who's a little bit more nascent, almost like a proxy for the viewer, and a fan of New York sports. So that's that show. They're also joined each day by a different sports betting expert who remotes in. So we have folks coming in from all over the country. Minty Betts has been appearing on the show. Alex Glaze. We have a few other folks who have been sort of rotating through, which has been great. And then the last show is going to be on Sunday mornings, and it's heavily focused on football. The show is Odds with Ends. That show is all focused around football and really takes the perspective of the former athlete through the lens of a sports betting fan. Those three shows, I think the approach we had was to develop distinct half-hour shows tied to sports betting, each with their own sort of personality and approach. We built out new sets to sort of house these shows, so they had their own look and feel. It didn't necessarily just feel like it was coming from the MSG Network studio, which is great, but serves a specific purpose. So these shows are really sort of built off of serving a different purpose for a different, maybe an audience with a different focus. Not totally a different audience, but a different focus subset of our audience. So that's sort of where we're at with those shows. Sorry, I just went way on. So jump in.
No, that's fantastic. I did want to, before we get into some of the audience targeting and the programming strategies and all that kind of stuff, would like to carve through some of the operational things. You got one there. Are you adapting studios, actually opening physical studios? I've been to MSG Networks offices a few times, and like a lot of offices in New York, space is at a bit of a premium. How were you able to find space in your facility to build sets dedicated exclusively to this? You mentioned a lot of in front of camera talent. Did you have to hire any additional behind the camera talent that had experience with this kind of stuff? Operationally, what chess pieces did you need to move around in order to set you up for this?
Yep. So there were a couple starting on the behind the camera talent standpoint. We actually made a couple hires over the past, I guess it's now maybe 6 months, and then even closer. Some folks with a background in developing shows and with a sort of focus on sports betting. Two of them, one, Jure St. Louis, who's a manager of our content strategy, and then Talia Wilkins, our VP of content strategy, to sort of oversee the launch and development of these shows and to focus on the development of these shows. So those are a couple folks that we brought on. Additionally, we brought on a lot of freelance production staff focused solely on these shows with a background in sports betting to sort of help get them off the ground and make sure that we're hitting on the right sort of notes and being true to sort of what the expectations are from a sports betting audience. So that's sort of where we went. And then we pulled in both internal and external resources to build out and develop the look and feel, and then ultimately the creation of these sets that we were able to find an underutilized space within our studio that sort of fit what we were looking for. So while office and studio space is at a big time premium, as you said, we were able to sort of move around some stuff and make room for these sets within our existing footprint, which was
cool. And those sets, do they have like their own control rooms, or do you have one control room that kind of controls everything?
Yeah, so we're leveraging our existing control rooms.
Okay.
To work through those sets. We'll probably be going through one control room for both shows. So the shows, I neglected to mention when they're actually on, which is terrible. Someone who's in charge of the marketing in these shows to not plug when you can watch them. So they're on Monday through Thursday, 5 and 5:30. We go 5 o'clock, the better half hour. And then 5:30, the betting exchange. So that's Monday through Thursday every week. And then Sundays at 11 is odds with ends. So those weekday shows, those are going to be coming out of the same control room back to back.
Okay. And then on a game night, that would give you the freedom to like those shows would be cleaned out prior to like a Rangers pregame or a Knicks pregame.
Yep. And the Rangers pregame would be coming out of a different control room.
Oh, okay.
Different studio set. So
okay.
It's so there's definitely some gymnastics being done by our production team, our tech ops team, to accommodate all this stuff because it's a lot of content coming from one place, but they're awesome at it, so we're able to make it work.
All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about audience because we've talked about it a lot with a few of the other presenters on the program today. The hardcore bettor versus the less seasoned but interested. Where the growth is in this. There's that audience dynamic. You've also got an interesting geographical dynamic where New Jersey is blowing up insanely, where your network is seen in plenty of counties across northern and central New Jersey. In-person betting is legal in New York, but mobile isn't yet. So you've kind of got an evolving landscape of geographic audience. So I guess let's start with maybe the seasoned bettor versus the newbie in terms of audience. What is your guys' approach to that? How do you kind of serve both, if you can serve both, or are you picking a lane?
Well, it's interesting. We did a ton of research around how we see differences between those audiences and what sort of content they want. And we saw that there's some areas of overlap for sure, but there's also key differences between those types of audiences. And that more traditional experience bettor feels like they have the right maybe angles and information to make bets and don't turn to TV for betting information. That interested bettor, that sort of more online bettor, a little bit more nascent, maybe New Jersey 4 years ago, like that sort of bettor, they're looking for information, education, entertainment. The education part, maybe they're not looking for it, but in the research we conducted, I think there are aspects of betting that they're still unclear on. So we think there's opportunity for us to sort of show them a little bit more information and insight into how betting works that then maybe they're specifically asking for, but we think there's a need for it out there. So we also saw that there's different types of content they want from formats. So the more traditional bettor isn't necessarily looking for a produced half-hour show coming from a studio. They're maybe looking for they love audio content. They may be looking for more of a radio play, or looking for short form content that's integrated into other areas that interested bettors looking for something specific to it. And they're looking to hear from different types of people. There's some overlap for sure, but that interested bettors looking to hear the perspective from a former athlete. They're looking for someone who maybe serves the proxy of themselves. So that's part of the reason why we built the shows around personalities like that.
Sure. Now, in terms of the geography, are you keeping an eye on, the potential mobile betting legalities in New York, or are you guys, it seems like you're pretty full tilt, so it might not matter at the end of the day to you.
Yeah, I think we're keeping an eye on it for sure. When it passes that threshold where, Connecticut and New York are sort of at the same place as New Jersey, where mobile betting is legal. That's great for us. And I think that means there's going to be even more interest from our audience in the type of content that we have. But I think part of the benefit that we've had is part of our territory, New Jersey, has had sports betting, legalized, mobile sports betting legalized for a few years. Or I guess, I don't know, years sort of blend together with the last couple of years that we've been through.
Yeah, the last year and a half don't count. Yeah.
It's like 3+ years now. So we've been able to look at that and say, okay, what sort of stuff performed within this footprint and what stuff didn't perform, and sort of help influence us as we develop content that's going to be seen by the wider footprint, as New Yorkers and people in Connecticut are like sort of in a phase where residents in New Jersey were in a few years ago. We could sort of use that to our advantage to help suss out the type of content we're putting out there.
Okay. You touched on this a little bit, but how do you feel that this sports betting programming that you guys have brought to the fore here very recently stands out from maybe other sports betting shows? I'm sure you watched plenty of others. You've, we've talked to a few others on the program here today. How do you think your take, New York take on this maybe stands out?
Ultimately, I think it's built off of the audience that we're targeting and the ways we're trying to create content that resonate with that specific audience. I think a lot of the sports betting content that's out there is aimed at that more experienced bettor. And we think there's an opportunity for us to aim more precisely at that interested bettor versus the experienced one, and speak in a language they're a little bit more comfortable in. So I think that's where it stands out. I think also the mix of personalities that we have, and the different perspectives that they bring will sort of complement each other and bring out unique perspectives there that I think will make our shows sort of stand out a bit.
Yeah, that's really interesting because we're seeing a lot of that where the talent, the on-air talent that's being hired, there's a good amount of them are former athletes, and that's a fantastic example of why. We were talking to Sarah Crennan and Minty, who you mentioned, Minty Betts, about their Yahoo Sports programming, and they've got the show with Austin Eckler, who's an active participant in the NFL right now. I'm wondering, that's a great example, but I'm wondering what your take is on why former athletes make a good fit in this format, because initially you wouldn't think that would be the case, but those are interesting insights that maybe bring color to a betting prop that normally you just wouldn't get from someone crunching the numbers.
Yeah, totally. I think, I think they make a lot of sense, partly because if you look at it like sports betting, people who are interested in sports betting are interested in sports and they're fans of sports. So especially that sort of next, nascent bettor, the interested bettor, they're fans of sports and they're fans of these teams and they like to hear from people that they're fans of. So I think there's that sort of gateway into knowledge around the space that makes sense. And then I also think athletes have a unique perspective that maybe was undertapped from a sports betting content standpoint, that allows people to get insight into the game in a way that maybe they're comfortable getting it. You see a lot of former athletes in non-sports betting shows as studio analysts and talking about the game. So I think it's a natural way in for them.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Real quickly before we let you go, and again, we appreciate you sharing your time at a very busy time for the network. You talked about maybe the audience doesn't necessarily want a long scripted show. We're talking mostly about the production of content here, but I want to get a little bit of your thought on distribution. How important is it? Do you kind of view the show as almost like an anchor piece of content, and how important it is to then go and chop it up and try to spread that out around as much as possible? Is that an important part of the entire chain of what you consider to be a day of the show?
Yeah, it's definitely an important part to it. So we're also launching at the same time as we're launching these new shows. We're launching a new social handle and a new YouTube channel, MSG Plus Minus, which is a name I think is very fun. So we're launching MSG Plus Minus, and that's our goal is to not only just like chop up content from some of these shows, but shoot specific content that we think is going to play a little bit better from a social standpoint. Look at, holding our talent to the fire a little bit and showing some of their picks from a social standpoint. And when they're 0 for, making sure everyone knows, but when they're 5 for 5, making sure everyone knows too, and sort of going through that and sort of building the discussion around that. I think that's important. And then I think the shows themselves, chopping them up and having specific segments that maybe have a little bit more of a shelf life than like talking about the games tonight, and putting those segments and using those to sort of serve that YouTube audience and get them a taste of the sort of content that we're going to have live on a daily basis. That'll bring them into the longer form pieces.
Okay. Whether it's colleagues in the RSN business, and this will be the last question, or other content creators of any type, having really bitten off a big chunk here with the debut of 3 shows here this season. What advice would you give someone who maybe hasn't made the leap into this kind of programming yet, but thinks it could add something to their lineup?
I think, well, one, maybe the timing should be a little bit before the season start instead of right the same week, because it's a bit hectic. No, I'm just kidding. I think one of the things that we've seen is the energy around these shows is sort of infectious, and it brings up this energy, and you have people doing something new. And when people are doing something new, that energy translates into other people who are doing stuff that has been consistent. So I think that's part of it. There's a fear in sort of jumping in and probably biting off all this stuff at once. But I think that it's helpful in doing it because each show is making the other show better. The talent can sort of talk together and work through things as we sort of grow. So I think rather than just dipping your toe and doing a little bit at a time, I think the fact that we're doing a bunch at once is really helping each of the shows in of themselves as well as individually.
All right. Well, again, to plug some of those shows, the new programming, Odds with Ends, debuted just this past Sunday. It's a regular Sunday morning show that airs at 11 a.m. Eastern on MSG Network. And Kevin mentioned The Better Half Hour and The Betting Exchange. They air Monday through Thursdays back to back at 5 p.m. Eastern and 5:30 p.m. Eastern. And if you want to follow their efforts, I guess around the clock, if you will, follow their new social handle that he mentioned on Twitter and Instagram at MSG Plus Minus. He is Kevin Marotta, SVP of Marketing and Content Strategy at MSG Networks. Again, Kevin, really can't appreciate it enough. You taking some time for us. Thanks for stopping by the show.
Thanks so much, Brandon.